This week on Inside Olympia, from wolf recovery to salmon recovery, the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife finds itself in the middle of the most contentious fights and environmental challenges of our times. On the program, the Director of Fish and Wildlife, Kelly Susewind.
From the TVW studio, it's Inside Olympia with host Austin Jenkins.
And welcome to Inside Olympia. Wolves, salmon, budget challenges, and long-term concerns. These are all issues at the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. Joining me now, and for the full hour, is the Director of the agency, Kelly Susewind. Welcome back to the program. Good to see you.
Thank you, Austin. Glad to be here.
Yeah, been about a year since you took this job.
Just about a year, just over a year.
Before we launch in, just a little bit of background on your agency. You do have a broad portfolio. The Department of Fish and Wildlife's job is to preserve and protect fish, wildlife, and habitat. It has 6 regional offices and roughly 1,800 employees, and it's responsible for many things, including fishing and hunting licensing, regulation, and enforcement. It also manages habitat and endangered species conservation. Overall, the agency manages more than 1 million acres of wildlife lands, including many water access sites. The department is overseen by a 9-member commission that is governor appointed, and the commission is responsible for directing WDFW policy and appointing the agency's director. So having been in this job for a little over a year, having been at Ecology previously, first impressions or first year impressions, and have you thought about fleeing back to the calmer waters of Ecology?
At moments, but overall, no. First impression is I estimated high the enormity of the job, but I estimated low, it turns out. I thought I was estimating high, I should say. It's just a tremendous responsibility lies on this agency, and the number of issues are incredibly broad and incredibly complex. So that it's been tougher than I anticipated. Again, having anticipated it'd be really tough. But there's reasons for that. It's because it's so important, I think, to our lifestyle, our culture here in the Northwest. This is fundamental to who we are. And so people come at it with a 100% passion. And so that's the first impression. I think there's plenty of room to go. The timing is such that we have to do more than we're doing now. If we want to maintain that cultural identity, we are a very small state with a very large population. We anticipate a lot more people coming. We need to be on our game if we're going to maintain and preserve, protect, perpetuate fish and wildlife in this state. So those are the things I'm passionate about, those things I care about. So from that perspective, no, I haven't regretted it a bit. I regret I'm impatient, so I want to make more progress, but we really are steering a tanker, and so it's going to take some time.
Do you feel like because this is fish and wildlife, in some cases it's east and west, that you're sort of pulled in 2 different directions, or that it's very hard because of the combination of those 2 things to sort of know on which day to be focused where?
Well, it certainly broadens the scope of the agency. I think it's appropriate to have them tied together. That's one of the things that I hope that in the years to come we can get a better general understanding amongst our population that everything really is tied together. We manage too much into silos, into individual species, fish versus wildlife. What's good for habitat is good for the ecosystem, is good for fish and wildlife. It's good for everything we're trying to do. So I think from that perspective, it's appropriate to have them linked. But it certainly expands the scope of the agencies a lot more.
Well, let's talk about a little bit of the administrative changes you've made since coming in. How we don't need to go into a deep dive on the org chart, but just in terms of some things you identified coming in and some changes you've made, new positions you've carved out.
Sure, I'll touch on a couple of new positions. We've done more than that, obviously, but these are the keys. One is fisheries does take up a huge amount of the agency. It's about half of our staffing. It's a lot of our issues. We have our biggest program is the fish program, and we had one person running that program and also trying to be point on all the fish policy, and the fish policy is huge in this state. And that was just too much for any individual. I wanted somebody to be able to focus on the policy side of this and actually not be trying to manage 800 or 900 employees as well, FTEs. That's more than a full-time job, and that doesn't leave much for the policy side, which is where we really need to focus. So I created a director of fish policy. I put our former fish program director into that, Ron Warren. He's been at this for a number of years. He's aptly skilled and able to take that on. And this will hopefully provide him, or will provide him, a lot more time to focus on what's the strategy we should be employing, where do we want to be in a few years, how do we best poise ourselves for negotiations and setting seasons, et cetera. He was doing that before, but under a much more compressed time frame, so hopefully that can be a little more productive.
And just before we go into the other position, on that front, did you give Ron specific marching orders, or did you say, you know, I've identified, I know there's always tensions between the commercial and sport fishermen and the rights of the tribes, so you're oftentimes trying to triangulate, I guess, but did you have to say to him, look, I really want you to go after this particular thing, or was it a broader mandate? It
was the broader mandate. We have certainly some specifics, but it's the broader mandate. And again, I think if we can look holistically going forward, that's one of the challenges. Commercial fishermen, recreational fishermen, tribal fishermen, they all want more fish. We want a healthier fish population. That's the goal. How do we work together? How do we hopefully collaborate to get there? And are there particular areas we should focus on within that? But for Ron, it's more the broader area. How do we advance the needs of fisheries and fish populations in the state for everyone?
Okay, and we'll talk more about that during the hour.
Okay.
You also created a position of Director of Conservation Policy.
Yeah, that's a new one for us. So you mentioned we're responsible for fish, wildlife, and habitat. I think maybe it's because of our name, but people stop at fish and wildlife and don't think about the habitat side. And I really want our agency to be a premier conservation, habitat, natural resource. Pick your title. The connotations put you into particular silos where I'm trying to avoid. This is the broader environmental side of the agency, the habitat, the restoration, the maintenance level of the agency for habitat and ecosystems. It's an area where I think we have a tremendous skill level in the agency, but we need to enhance it even further, and we need to have the external world recognize that's a major part of our portfolio. So when people think, who are the conservation, natural resource agencies in this state, I want Fish and Wildlife to be the first thing that comes to mind, not something that doesn't make the first page or makes the bottom of the list because we're viewed as a hunting and fishing organization. If we do good for ecosystems, we do good for habitat, we do good for fish and wildlife populations, we'll do good for fishing and hunting opportunities as well.
And to that end, you're starting to think about a longer term horizon for planning.
Yeah, we go through a strategic plan like most agencies, and it's a short term, but it can quickly devolve, I believe, into here's a task list for the next few years. So I put Jeff Davis in charge of our strategic plan, and we're going to look out at least 25 years. So we want to know, and people get a little bit nervous when they hear that because you can't really plan at 25 years. But it's more the forward looking. Where do we want to be in 25 years? We're starting a long journey here. If we don't know where we're going, probably won't get there. So we have to look at the 25-year horizon. What do we want to be different in this state in 25 years, and then work backwards, and then get into a more manageable 5-year chunk of actual task list items, an actual work plan. But the strategy should be looking 25 years ahead. How
much does global warming have to factor into a 25-year horizon?
It has to factor in a major way, of course. The two big factors I think have to be considered are that climate change, but also population change. We're anticipating, it depends on which projections, but many million more people in a state that already has a high human population relative to our footprint. So we're going to have to get better about how we exist on this landscape if we're going to preserve, protect, and perpetuate fish and wildlife. And you can't put that many more people here. We're not probably making it as much progress as we should be now, and it's only going to get harder with climate change and population increase. So it's going to be, we as a society, as a state, are going to have to make some hard choices.
Yeah, the numbers, we're now at 7.5 million. I've been hearing 9 million by 2040, which isn't that far away. We're going to dive into a lot of these issues, and a lot of them are thorny and controversial. I do, because we're coming up on a supplemental budget year in January, short legislative session. They're not rewriting the budget, but certainly agencies are now putting forward their requests for January and for that supplemental budget. Your agency has what might seem like a small ask in the context of a $50 billion 2-year budget, but is actually a large ask for a supplemental year, and that is a $26 million request for supplemental funds. Why and usually it would be a couple million?
Yeah, for our agency, it's 2 or 3. I like your characterization, though. It's a small in the big picture of the state. Let's go with that. For us, it's pretty huge. It's $26 million. We're using the $2-3 million range. And part of that is because we came up short last year. As you know, we went in with a $30 million ask, $31 million ask last year, got about $24.5 million. And that was one-time funding as well. So we ended up short there. We also had mandated costs from the legislature, which I think were great costs to add. There are things like cost of living increases for our employees, but they gave us the authorization to pay for those without the revenue to pay for those. And so we came up short last year. We're trying to recover that. So moving forward, we have about a $26 million ask. Ballpark, about half of that's a maintenance level. So those things like increased utilities, the increased cost of living, et cetera. About $6.5 million is for the money we asked for last time and didn't get, and the other for emerging needs. So there's some Puget Sound monitoring, some ability to do some more habitat work, those types of things. So a slight increase in the $6 million range. Altogether adds up to $26 million. It's a big ask in a supplemental year. I hesitated to ask that big, to be honest. But we've checked in with budget writers at the legislature and legislators that are key to the budget process. And there was an acknowledgement that we came up short last year. And at least for the folks we've talked to, we're pretty high on the list to get that fixed this year. So we're going in with the full $26 million ask. A big part of the ask is to make it ongoing. That's been our struggle. We get a partial fix, one-time money at the end of the biennium. That goes away and you're back where you started. Prices or cost of doing business has gone up, so you're further behind. You go in, you ask for it, you get a partial fix, it goes back. So you're actually going back a couple of times. And so we've gone in before for 10 million, then 20 million, then 30 million. If we don't get an answer or a fix here, we'll be looking at a $50 million shortfall in the next biennium, which means we'll have to be making some pretty serious cuts in the coming year if we're unsuccessful.
It was not that long ago that your agency was kind of in the penalty box with budget writers. And I know that prompted a review. There were some budget cuts or savings that were achieved. But can you sort of explain where you think that the agency is positioned now in terms of, from a budgetary standpoint, in terms of building that trust with budget writers?
I think we've made a lot of progress, particularly with budget writers, staff and actual legislators. So in the 2017 legislation, we got a one-time fix again, and with that came a homework assignment. It seemed punitive at the time to the agency. We've actually embraced it. It's been a great thing for our agency. Required we do a zero-based budget, make sure that we're spending on the right things, hire a third-party independent contractor to evaluate how we manage the budget. They did that and found that we manage it pretty well. We're in line with other state agencies and other state fish and wildlife agencies outside of the state. And then come up with a longer-term planning, which is what we're presenting to the legislature now. So I think there was an acknowledgement of that work. I think we've made a lot of progress with particular budget writers and legislators. We just hit a tough spell last year. That's one of the challenges with our agency. We are making incredibly controversial decisions almost daily. We are assured to upset a lot of people with whatever decision we make. And when those decisions happen to coincide with legislative sessions and budget writing times, those take the forefront. And so that's part of the goal, again, to build this broader view of the agency as a habitat conservation agency, so that people recognize what our agency really does is provide that foundation of a healthy ecosystem, healthy habitat. We are so much more than a hunting or fishing season. So not to suggest we're not going to make decisions that upset people, but I hope when they take a look at those in the broader context, they will say, well, this agency, a healthy, stable agency is what we need to meet our needs. That's what the stakeholders we heard from last year, broad coalition of stakeholders at the legislature, folks who are normally arguing with each other, united and consistent with the idea that what we all need for our interests, these are disparate interests, is a healthy, solid foundation, which means a stable agency. And so that's my hope going forward. I think we've made a lot of progress on it. That said, we're going to unavoidably be making tough decisions that people are going to love and hate.
I think the last time we talked, we were talking about proposals to increase hunting and fishing license fees. I'm noticing that part of the reason for your budget ask is that the agency notes that the legislature's not approved an increase since 2011, and obviously that's a critical source of ongoing revenue. So what's been the holdup in terms of getting that approval, and by not getting that approval, how is that affecting your budget?
Well, not getting it last year really affected our budget in the shortfall that we experienced. As the legislators put our budget together, they had booked an increase in license fees anticipating it would go through, and it did not. And so that's really the source of the shortfall, or at least the short time frame at the end of the legislature to address that. We've just not been successful we've gone in 3 times now for an increased fee. They pay about a quarter of our state budget, our agency budget, I should say. And we're 0 for 3 on those, so this year we're going in with just general fund. A lot of it, I think, the resistance, and as a buyer of our own product, our licenses, people are seeing less opportunity, and they're viewing that they're paying for opportunity when they buy a license. And it's my job to make sure that we deliver on the habitat side, on the healthy population side, so that we can do that. The reality, where I sound like a broken record bureaucrat, is when you have small supplies, when the abundances are low, it costs more to produce, not less to produce fishing, or to implement fishing and hunting seasons. That's not very satisfactory if you're purchasing that and you want to go out and have a good hunting or fishing trip. And so folks just weren't ready to take that dive on a higher fee. As you said, 2011 was the last time we increased them.
So where do you think you go from here in terms of proposing and asking the legislature for permission, in light of the fact probably that rub you're describing isn't going to get any easier or better, which is I'm asking you, hunter, fisher person, to pay more, with the reality being you may have less opportunity.
So we're going in this year with the $26 million ask. It's all on general fund. Yeah. We're not putting it on the fee payer. I think we need to make some progress there, and I think that actually helps my overall message, which is everybody in the state, whether you hunt or fish or not, benefits from the fish and wildlife in the state. It's what makes us the Pacific Northwest. It's what makes us Washington State. And so it's appropriate, I think, for a broader-based source of funding like a general fund to pay for that, because we all benefit from it, whether you hunt or fish or not.
You also want that reliability, though, and I think the stat you've used, or that your agency uses, is that here it is. In a state, this is messaging from the agency, in a state valued for its quality of outdoor lifestyle, less than 1% of the general fund goes to support all natural resource agencies combined, and that would include your agency, but also DNR, state parks, and other agencies, Department of Ecology, even in the Puget Sound Partnership. Is there a broader message here from the natural resource agencies to the legislature about thinking about either a new dedicated source of funding for natural resources, or just the idea that less than 1% is not enough in a state like this?
I think long term we need to address both of those. Is there an alternative dedicated source of funding, or are we going to rely on a bigger piece of general fund? I like the dedicated idea better, obviously, because otherwise you get in the economic swings of the general fund. I've talked to my peers with other agencies, and we're getting better. I think we need to make vast improvements so that how we hang together as natural resource agencies. The 1% of our state general fund going to all natural resource agencies for a state like Washington is it's hard to even comprehend. It's shameful, honestly, to me, that we aren't investing more of that in our natural resources. And I think most citizens, when they realize that's the level of investment, they would support more. I would hope they would support more. That said, one of the few jobs I think would be a lot tougher than mine would be a legislature, and trying to deal with all this and do healthcare, education, everything else. They've got a lot on their plate too. So we'll keep working with them and hope for the best.
Okay. Let's talk about some of those controversial issues, and I do want to start with wolves. It's a natural starting point, I think, given how much it's been in the news of late, and it rates high in the controversy meter. But again, let's start with a broader question. Wolf recovery in this state started, I think, in about 2008. Yeah. Where are we on the sort of timeline and continuum in terms of wolf recovery? I know that there is a point at which they'd be delisted, and then it would just be about managing them. And it seems like we're getting pretty close to that. But how do you, when you look at that timeline, starting recovery in 2008 to wherever we're kind of headed, can you help place us on that timeline?
I want to be cautious. There's an annual variation, but I put us towards the later end of that, towards the recovery end for certain. I mean, in 2008, so we're only looking about a decade ago, we first started seeing wolves in our state, or having wolves in our state. We do an assessment annually at the end of the year. Last year we had 126 wolves. That's a number that's biased low, because when we count a wolf, we're confident in it. If there's a question, you don't count, so we intentionally end up low. 27 packs, so that's from 0, a little more before 2008. If you look at wolves as a whole in the Northern Rockies, it hasn't been that long since they introduced, and we have thousands of wolves throughout that broader territory. They're incredibly resilient. They will do well. I think we're very near the delisting point. I want to be careful, though. We're going to go through a process. We have right now scoping for an environmental review of a post-recovery management plan. So we've got a great wolf plan. It's taken us to where we are with our recovery, but it only really talks about how do you get to recovery. It doesn't say what do you do after recovery. So we have out right now, I think, comments through tomorrow. It's tomorrow or November 1st, on the scoping of what's a post-recovery wolf plan look like. So we're certainly at the point where we need to start planning for post-recovery, and I think we're certainly recovered in portions of the state. As a state as a whole, we're not quite there, so we have to figure out what that means for us going forward. But we're definitely towards the latter part of that curve you described.
And would this be a combination of state and federal delisting that would happen?
There's a separate process for the federal delisting. There was a proposal there as well to delist for the this area, basically Northern Rockies already were, excuse me, for gray wolves in the lower 48. Separate from that, we've got a state environmental act. So under state law right now, wolves are protected or threatened endangered throughout the state. Under federal law, it only applies in the western 2/3. Okay. So the eastern third. That's what allows us to do some of the management we do there. The controversial management you mentioned is that it is delisted on the eastern third.
In a kind of post-protected status environment, can you imagine a management plan that allows for the hunting of wolves?
It's certainly on the table. It's a controversial issue. I don't know if we'll get there or not, or if that'll be the outcome of our processes, but it certainly needs to be on the table. It's been an activity that occurs in other states when they've reached the recovery stage.
And why does it need to be on the table? Is that a management question?
Well, no, I guess
the population.
I guess it doesn't have to be. To me, it's a process question. It's a good governance. So we're going into this with an open mind. We have no preconceived notions of what a post-delisting plan looks like, and so I want virtually everything on the table. Let's give it a thorough vetting with a broad public base. Let's understand where the citizens want to be on this issue. We could manage with or without a hunting season. I think as you get to bigger numbers. There's just the realities of what it's going to take to manage, and we have to manage. It's an apex predator. It's wonderful that we're getting to recovery. We have to manage in a way where they can coexist with humans.
I think people can, and even if somebody who doesn't hunt themselves might understand hunting fowl, they might understand hunting deer and elk, because clearly when you hunt those animals, you're getting meat and you can eat them, and there's sort of this reason for getting your own food source. Hunting wolves doesn't necessarily have that correlation. So what would be the purpose for hunting wolves other than somebody doesn't like them and wants a tag to go kill them, or the sport of it, or perhaps because it's a way to augment population control to the extent the agency needs to do that?
I would hope it would be the latter two. We don't want folks out there killing wolves because they don't like wolves. It's a legitimate hunting activity. It's not for protein, as you said, but it has to be. If we allow it, it has to be done as part of management control, population control. From that perspective, there are a lot of folks out there who would like to enjoy going out and pursuing it. It'd be a challenge, to say the least. To do this from the ground in the way that we hunt in this state would be a challenge for folks. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, we again, no preconceived notion of how that turns out. Certainly there's less appetite for hunting that's not associated with food without gathering protein. So it's tougher in general, and then you bring in the passion people have for wolves. Yes. We're a long ways from getting to a hunting season, I think.
Okay, well, let's talk about something that is happening, and there is a form of hunting, and it is that your agency at times is taking action to kill wolves that are killing livestock. The governor about a month ago sent you a letter saying that he wants your agency to make changes in how it's managing wolves, particularly in Northeast Washington, where the depredations continue, and the lethal removal, as the term of art that's used, continues. He says, I'm quoting here from this letter, I believe we cannot continue using the same management approach on this particular landscape in Northeast Washington. We must look for other strategies that address the unique nature of this particular geographic area. The governor went on to say that he's asking you to accelerate the update for the lethal management guidelines with the goal of significantly reducing the role of lethal removal in the wolf management program. You responded to the governor after that letter, but why don't you sort of update us on, and let's begin with your response to that and what you said in response.
So the governor was, he also said in there he thinks that wolf recovery in the state by and large is a success and we're on a good path. He particularly pointed out for the cattle region,
Yep.
In particular, an area where we have had the majority of our depredations and the majority of our lethal removals, that we need to do something different or better there. That's, we're not in disagreement with that. What's going on in that particular location is not working well for wolves, it's not working well for people, certainly not working well for our coexistence with wolves, livestock, and people on the landscape. So we were going to embrace the letter and figure out, he wants to report back by December 1st or some alternatives. I'll be honest, the part of the letter that kind of stings is we're not sitting around with an obvious solution that we just not elected to take. This is a tough issue in that area in particular. It's incredibly rugged terrain, it's heavily forested, we have a lot of wolves there, we have a lot of livestock there. It's kind of a recipe for a challenging situation. That said, we will work with the locals. That's absolutely key. If you're not working with the people who are living there, living with the wolves, you're not going to be successful. And figure out some things we can do. Are there increased non-lethals? Can we have a greater human presence? Can we have more focused and targeted range riding? Is there something we can do for land treatment in a broader sense in that whole area for making it an easier area to have grazing and protect cattle? It's can you open up the forest cover in some areas? It'd be good for forest health as well. So I've reached out to the Forest Service, trying to work with them, and we'll continue to work with our statewide wolf advisory group and the locals to figure out something more we can do there. It's a tough challenge. We will always face a challenge there, so that if we can make it work there, we can make it work anywhere.
Sure. What does the impact, because you have the wolf advisory group, you have the stakeholders and the people who are affected by this and keenly interested in wolf recovery at the table, trying to figure out how to manage these challenges on the landscape. How does a letter like this, what effect does a letter like this have on a process that's already underway and a table that's already set?
Well, I think the governor acknowledges that table, and he acknowledges that that's a good way to go. I think our approach is a little different. It's a little more collaborative. It's a little more holistic than other states. So that advisory group is the heart of that more collaborative approach. And the governor's saying, speed it up. Figure out more, particularly around the protocol. That's our term of art that's our guideline for when do we consider lethal removal. It's a guideline. It's only a threshold below which we really don't consider lethal removal, above which we consider it. It's not mandated that we go there. So hopefully, probably the same reaction I had initially, is a kind of a little sting at first. But if you look at it, he's appreciating your work and asking you to accelerate it. And so I hope they take it in that spirit and double down on the effort.
Are there, A, can you accelerate this effort, and B, are there some alternatives to lethal removal that are emerging or that you could do more of?
We can accelerate it. It's a protocol. You can accelerate it, but part of the power of the protocol is it has had time for everybody to buy in. We intentionally have that be a very diverse group as well. Yeah. Ranchers, conservationists, everybody at the table, everybody recognizing we're all going to have to give a little to make this recovery successful. So it's a challenge to accelerate it, but it can be accelerated. There are no silver bullets, probably a bad pun, but we can increase human presence. We can do better range riding. We work on, but most of the alternatives we know are out there. It's a matter of how can we deploy them differently or more aggressively to avoid getting in a situation where a pack begins a habit of depredating on livestock.
What's this been like for you when you've had to issue the order to approve?
It's the hardest decisions I've had to make. Our goal, our mandate is that we recover wolves. We don't come about a lethal removal decision lightly. We have a ton of wolf experts within our agency. They're incredibly talented, educated, and gifted in this. These are folks who, as children, decided they want to be wildlife biologists when they grew up. They then went into carnivore work. Their life work is recovering wolves. They're in a situation of making a recommendation to me that often ends up with a lethal removal. It's tough on them, it's tough on me. We don't want to go there, but we all accept that really for the recovery of wolves, we need to make sure that we have a management tool in place so that they can be coexistent on the landscape with livestock, with people. So it's a necessary, it's a tough issue, it's a tough decision, but it's a necessary step to ensure that the recovery is complete.
By my count, I think you've made this decision at least 4 times since taking the job. Does that sound right?
It seems like there's more than that.
More than that, okay.
Yeah.
On the flip side, what's interesting is, as you say, the problem seems to be kind of contained to this northeastern corner of the state, and specifically the Kettle Range. You've got a lot of federal Forest Service land there, a lot of livestock grazing in the same area where the wolves are. But the stat that your agency puts out is that 80% of the packs that have been identified are not actually involved in depredation, so that this is limited to a certain number of packs in a certain area at this point, for the most part.
For the most part.
Because I think there's also been some depredations in southeast Washington.
Southeast, yeah. We issued our first lethal removal order in the southeast and removed 1 wolf from the Grouse Flats pack down in the Blue Mountains. So that's why I don't want to get lost in the intensity to think that if we solve this in the kettles that there will never be other lethal removal. It's certainly more intense there, certainly more frequent there. But overall, again, we have at least 27 packs in the state. Last year, 3 of them reached the threshold to consider lethal removal. 3 out of 27 overall is a pretty good record. The Grouse Flats pack, particularly in the southeast, that's something we need to pay attention to because there's a more mixed checkerboard land ownership down there. So it's private and public. That we need to be able to manage down there. So it's a pretty easy idea to say, well, just stop on public land, but you have to make sure that we manage these wolves in a way where they don't become problems that then translate into private land as well. So it's broader than just the Northeast, but it's certainly most intense there. But we have the most wolves and the most livestock in those grazing areas up there.
I know the conservationists were critical of the fact that one of the wolves that was killed recently was a breeding female. And the argument against killing a female would be that she could actually teach her cubs to hunt for wild animals, and they might default to the easier prey, which could be the livestock. Can you just speak to the decision to allow, again, to use the term your agency uses, lethal removal, but the killing of a female breeding wolf as opposed to a male?
Sure. There's lots of theories, and a lot of it is theories on what happens, how you disrupt the dynamics, the pack culture of those wolves. We did not target a female wolf. Again, it's these same guys out there. They're trying to recover wolves. They end up in the air with a number of wolves under them. We definitely try to avoid a female, but when you're up there and it's happening quick, you can't really be certain. So the notion that we targeted a female is totally
And I'm not
incorrect.
saying somebody said that. I didn't necessarily understand the context for it, but it happened. So
it happened.
But it was what you're saying is the target typically or almost always going to be the male pack leader?
If we have a choice, that would
That's
be
what
our
you're going
first
to.
choice.
Okay.
So that's one of the examples where it's worked for us. In Smack Out Pack last year, we removed the dominant male, and we've had no problems since. So that certainly that may be somewhat coincidental, but in that case, we think that was the wolf that actually initiated that behavior, and it worked. Just for the idea of recovering wolves, we don't want to be taking out breeding females intentionally, but this is hard work, and when you're up there, you can't tell the difference.
They're in
always.
helicopters.
They're in a helicopter for that removal. We try to understand what the breeding female looks like as far as color, gray, black, and try to avoid the females, but you just can't always do it.
This issue is controversial on any given day, but it got so heated lately that your agency decided to cancel some meetings to discuss the future of wolves in Washington. What happened?
So those are the meetings that are associated with that SEPA scoping study I talked about, a scoping period. where we're looking at a post-recovery plan. We're also bringing translocation in to evaluate it at the same time, moving wolves around the state. And so it was an intent to go out and just get public input face-to-face on that scoping of a post-recovery plan. How do we want to manage wolves in this state once we've reached recovery? I had some input from our enforcement, which are commissioned state police, local sheriffs, and federal. We checked in with federal law enforcement. And the word I got was that we weren't confident we could provide a safe environment, safe for employees, safe for the public. You compound that with what we're really looking for is productive input. It looked like these meetings were probably not going to be set up for success as far as productive input. So I made the decision that I just wasn't going to put people in that environment. It's atypical for us. I really believe in the face-to-face. We need to take care of our use of our modern tools as best we can, but nothing substitutes for that face-to-face in-person meeting. So it was a hard decision to step away from that now. One, we're committed to operating that in the future. We'll make sure that we have opportunities where we have time to plan and can provide a safe, productive environment for those meetings. In the meantime, we did go to webinars. We've had 500 people attend public meetings through webinars. We've had about 900 people fill out our questionnaire, online questionnaire. And so we just felt, especially at this time, the scoping, what's critical at scoping is you get all the issues on the table. It's not a voting. More votes for one issue doesn't raise it to the top. What are the issues we need to consider? Are we getting them all? I think with our webinar and our questionnaire, we're getting there. It's not as good as an in-person meeting. We are committed to having those in the future. I just made the call at this time. I wasn't going to put people in that situation.
Is translocation, just going back to, we talked about hunting potentially down the road, is moving wolves, spreading them out, getting them into other parts of the state under serious consideration?
It is. It's part of. It'll be part of that same study. Translocating is a challenging concept. Where people most want to use translocation is when they have a problem, and that's the worst place to use it because you don't want to take a problem situation and just move it somewhere else. The other challenges are people willing to have wolves come into an area. That said, we can put it on there. What translocation really does is it potentially accelerates the time till you have distribution across the state. I think wolves will get there on their own. Can we accelerate it through translocation? Is that a good idea or a bad idea? Again, I won't prejudge, but there's some definite challenges with getting translocation to work.
I certainly know a lawmaker or two think a wolf pack in Orcas Island would be a fantastic idea. I'm not sure the people of Orcas Island think that, but we've certainly seen those bills.
We've seen those bills, yes. And they have not been successful in the legislature.
Just a couple last points on this topic. Sure. You're looking for, and actually currently accepting applications for this wolf advisory group. Does anybody actually want to be on the wolf advisory group these days?
Yeah, it's a high intention, a big ask for an individual to volunteer their time for that. But people are so passionate about wolves that yes, we have a lot of people who want to participate. They want to make sure that it's done well. They want to make sure their interests are represented. So yeah, there's a lot of people, and those are a tremendous commitment on their part, and we appreciate that. And those are some tough meetings as well. Those are the people face to face that I said I appreciate so much across the table from somebody who has an entirely different viewpoint.
More than half the battle is learning to work together when you are coming from very different places.
Very different places, as diametrically opposed as I've seen.
Yeah. And then just lastly, is there any other state we can look to in the Rocky Mountains for advice or for experience? And I realize that Washington looks very different than Idaho or Montana or Wyoming, but have you talked to colleagues? Have you picked up any, because those states in many ways are ahead of us in terms of recovery?
They're certainly ahead of us in recovery as far as numbers, and we have definitely reached out and talked to them about non-lethal controls, lethal removal, et cetera. It is a very different terrain. It's a very different politic there, but we have certainly learned from them. We are a little more unique here in Washington, have talked a lot to our counterparts in Oregon, which are more similar to us, and everybody struggles with these questions. It's a challenge to put this predator back on the landscape in a way that's compatible with our pre-existing uses of the land. But we're getting there. I think, frankly, we're out in front of most states. We certainly have invested more in this collaborative societal side of the equation. I think there's a recognition, again, that this is a very resilient species, the challenge with recovering wolves is a societal challenge more than a biological challenge. We've accepted that, invested in that, and embraced that, and hopefully we'll be leaders. There's going to be some bumps along the way.
Yeah. So we've been talking about taking out wolves in Northeast Washington. Now there's a proposal to remove sea lions on the Columbia River and potentially on its tributaries because they eat, devour, consume a lot of salmon. And so what's prompting this, and it's not like this hasn't happened before. I mean, I think NOAA Fisheries has been doing lethal removal below the Bonneville, right?
We've been doing lethal removal. What this really does, it's literally an act of Congress that expands the Marine Mammal Protection Act to make it to basically facilitate the ability to do removals. So we've been able to do it for a long time. It's under Section 120 of the Act. It's the Marine Mammal Protection Act. So it's a very stringent act. It's not to manage wolves, not to manage sea lions. It's to protect sea lions. So it's pretty tough to get through. We've had that permit for a number of years. It's incredibly bureaucratically onerous to actually implement a lethal removal on sea lions. This bill makes it a little simpler to do that. We do know we've got significant problems with sea lions, particularly in the Columbia. They're concentrated. They concentrate at Bonneville Dam. Estimates of up to 40% of some of our critical runs are being consumed right there. So we're investing an incredible amount of political will, an incredible amount of finances to recovering salmon, and we've got a pinch point there where it's decimating those salmon. So it's an opportunity for us to just take a little more aggressive lethal removal at those locations. It's really River Mile 112 and up. So it was more of a facilitating the ability. The expansion was it does allow stellar sea lions to be removed. Prior it was only California's.
And did I read somewhere that the request of the plan would be to potentially kill like up to 400?
Yeah, we submitted a permit application that has a comment period that's about to close at the federal comment period. In that we had between 200 to 300 Californias and 100 to 200 in round number stellar removals. Historically, we've moved anywhere from like 30 to 190 in a given year.
So this is would be a significant increase.
It would be an increase, and it allows us to be a little more responsive on the spot. Previously, we had to identify an individual animal. You catch them, you brand them, then you have to see them back there for a given number of days, and you have to see them eat a salmon. Then you can try to catch that particular animal again. It's just the mechanics of actually making it happen were incredibly difficult. With this, if the animal's in the area above mile 112, we assume he's there for the wrong reasons, and you don't have to go through all those steps. Beyond that, it's kind of the same as the old, except stellars being included.
I do want to be clear about who does. Is it your agency that
in this
them?
case, we can do it. We can also we work with our tribal partners out there, CRITFIC, Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, and so the permit would allow either of us to remove them.
And what role does NOAA Fisheries have in all this?
They're the overseer of this, so it's under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. They have to issue the permit that allows us to
But
do
the
this.
Actual lethal removal happens at the.
We anticipate it would be the
okay.
agencies ourselves, our counterparts in Oregon, and tribes.
So how does this conversation about killing sea lions and seals who are eating the salmon fit into the broader picture about the declining southern resident orcas, orca recovery general, and of course just bringing back wild salmon stocks to the Columbia River?
Well, it's certainly in that particular location, we've got a lot of evidence. It's a limiting factor in our ability to recover those salmon, and it's Chinook salmon primarily that we're concerned about, which are the primary food source for orcas. We have a similar issue going on in Puget Sound. It tends to be more with seals than sea lions. We are not actively pursuing a permit there, but we're figuring out what can we do in Puget Sound. It's one of the things you'll most frequently hear is a complaint of salmon recovery in Puget Sound, particularly by our anglers who are seeing lots and lots of seals out there now.
Right.
So we're evaluating that opportunity. We have to take a comprehensive look at the salmon recovery, and that includes predation, it includes hatchery production, it includes harvest. It's all the all-H element plus the predation piece all have to be part of it. And it varies as far as the level of concern by location. In the Columbia, at that location, upwards of 40%, 20 to 40% on some studies of particular endangered runs. That's a huge hit on adult returning salmon. We just can't have that and make our recovery goals.
The result of the orcas have gotten, they're this iconic animal. The declining populations have gotten a lot of attention. Their ability to raise and healthy calves is a big concern, and we've seen the numbers dropping. There's also, as you sort of go down from there, you get to the concern about, and I'm sure you hear it a lot from at your agency, frustrated fishermen who are wondering, why are the salmon seasons so complex? Why is it so, why are my opportunities to fish so restricted or limited or seemingly haphazard or hard to predict month to month, year to year, but even month to month sometimes? What's going on? What's that landscape look like?
So there's a lot of elements within what you've just asked about. So the predictability, the level of opportunity overall. The level of opportunity overall is driven by the abundance of fish, and we're seeing declining numbers of fish. And we have to put conservation first. If we don't conserve them, we won't have fish to fish on. So that's the reality. It's partly our job to turn that around so we can actually see some increasing runs of fish. But our first step is conservation, setting seasons that allow or take without affecting long-term recovery of those. The complexity of the regulations is largely driven by the fact that we're trying to eke out every opportunity we can. And so we go into a season setting process. Up front, we have to be somewhat conservative. If we set things up on an in-season management approach, it allows us in season to adjust to what we're seeing. If we have to decide before, we're going to have to be even more restrictive. And so it's a double-edged sword, particularly those folks that have to take vacations, or the charters or commercial guys that are trying to help other people get out there on the water, booking hotels, et cetera. Having last-minute closures is a problem. So we're trying to find a balance there where we eke out that opportunity. We say, well, we're going to give you this chance. If things pan out and then they don't, we have to shut it. That's an unfortunate circumstance, and people get upset with that change. It does seem somewhat chaotic. Yeah. The flip side is, if I have to tell you in advance, you will be guaranteed to be able to fish this many days, it's going to be a far fewer number of days. And so balancing, eking out opportunity, preserving and conserving the runs, and providing the best predictability as we can. You roll all that up into a big ball, and we are where we are. And we are committed to doing better and understanding better what people need, and where would they like to draw that balance.
Now I understand why you want some money to improve your mobile app, right? Because it sounds like the fishing world now is much more a day-to-day, as opposed to getting that calendar and knowing.
It very much is a day-to-day. These in-season managements tend to be done through an emergency rule, because there's not time to go through the long rulemaking process. We set up in advance what might happen, and we sign those almost daily. It seems that we're making an adjustment to a fishery somewhere in the state. So that mobile app has been particularly popular and helpful. You can look up for the stream you're on, what are the rules today, and verify that you're in compliance. So we do want to update that.
Sticking with the topic of fishing and salmon, there was obviously a ban on Atlantic salmon net pens because of the net pen that came apart up in I think the San Juan Island area. Released a bunch of Atlantic salmon into the Sound. Now there's a push and a move by Cook Aquaculture, in collaboration, at least in one case, with a tribe, to start to farm in these net pens native species. Your agency has some involvement here, as do others. What is your level of comfort with, on the one hand, opponents are saying this is just a workaround to the net pen ban. The company and the tribes are saying actually it could be an opportunity to augment populations. Then you go back to the opponents and they're saying, well, do it on the land, like normal fish hatcheries, don't do it out at sea. Because if something happens, you can potentially damage the Sound.
So we do have a role there. Our primary role is fish health, to make sure that those are disease-free, those fish. I wouldn't call it a workaround. It was debated in the legislature when they did the ban, whether or not to make it the ban broader. Okay. Is this a net pen ban, or is this an Atlantic salmon net pen ban? And the legislature arrived at the latter. Okay. So that was it was considered and within the intent of the rule. That said, it's a very similar operation. There are some other challenges raising a native fish. So we're taking precautions on the fish health side, and also making sure that the best we can that those are sterile fish, so if they do get out, they don't cause problems. They aren't competing with our wild fish. Beyond that, I'll leave it to the legislature to make the broader societal decision on whether or not we're going to have net pens. As long as they do, we will implement our responsibilities to make sure that we do them as safe as possible.
The role of whether it's a net pen environment or an on-land hatchery, hatcheries are controversial too, but they can. But now there's a proposal from a couple of Republican state lawmakers who looked at some nonprofit hatcheries up in Alaska that they think might be promising, and are interested in maybe bringing that idea down here to actually increase opportunities to do hatchery production. As you think about the tug of war around hatcheries, and also the need for more fish, but also the fact that they're hatchery produced, what's the balance point you're thinking about these days, or how are you kind of filtering the controversy and the views on both sides?
Well, when the hatchery issue in general for us, we're filtering it through using our best available science. So we're under a review right now of our hatchery reform policies. Part of the controversy over hatcheries, I don't think that anybody really disputes that there's been some, we've been at it for 100 years. I think any activity we've been at for over 100 years, we learn as we go along. Some of those early days, we weren't doing the best, well, may have been best science at the time, but we didn't have the science we have today on the genetics and
right.
and we had a better habitat situation than we have today as well. So we certainly learned. So I think we've, for fear of that implication, we've really clamped down on hatchery production. We probably went too far. That said, we'll never go back to the days where we were just, casually producing lots and lots of fish. I think it's incumbent on us to produce as many hatchery fish as we can responsibly. It's going to vary by watershed. There are places where hatcheries are going to be central there are conservation hatcheries central to recovery. There are places where we probably don't want to have hatchery fish introduced. That's all managed through a very intricate regulatory situation between the state, our co-managers, and NOAA Fisheries, again, as the overseer. We need to make sure we're using the best available science and that we're doing it in a responsible manner. On the nonprofit cost recovery kind of hatcheries, we're just starting to look into that. I think our situation in Washington is a little different with a little stronger co-management element, also endangered species list that we have to protect. I think there's a whole lot of new challenges to that concept here in Washington. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have it, again, on the table to evaluate fully. Okay,
just a couple minutes left here. Let's hit a couple other quick topics. Back in December of 2018, 6 million hatchery Chinook died after a power outage at the Mintor Creek Hatchery. Yes. You described it at the time as a painful loss. These are fish that could potentially help the orcas. I think you brought in somebody to do an outside review, try to figure out what went wrong, what steps could be taken to ensure it doesn't happen again. The issue was the power went out and the generator didn't kick on?
The power went out and the generator didn't kick on. And this is a big generator. A lot of input, well, just go grab a generator. Yeah. But this is a huge generator that usually has its own room or own building in it, and it failed to start. We did do an outside evaluation. We also, the estimate right now is we lost about 4 million fish. We estimated high initially, and we also were able to get some excess fish available from other hatcheries. That outside consultant, we wanted to go outside to make sure it was independent and it had people didn't view it as a biased review of our own. The generator failed to start because of a bad connection through the batteries. And so our staff did an admirable job in the situation of doing the best they could. We as an agency had not done an admirable job in making sure the maintenance and preparation for that was, we were ready for that situation. So we did that investigation. We have taken disciplinary action on individuals that should have been checking more frequently than they were. And we've then made sure that we're updating our guidelines across the state to make sure it doesn't happen at other hatcheries.
Okay, and just in less than 2 minutes, I know that you also put out a statement in March about allowing the extended use of gill nets in the Columbia River. You said gill nets are not the final answer, but it is important to increase opportunities for commercial catch so that industry.
So that was one of those controversial decisions. Our commission made a decision to extend gill netting in the Columbia River. It was planned to be phased out. We have a subcommittee of the commission working with their counterparts from Oregon to make sure we get concurrency with Oregon this year. They'll be making a recommendation to the commission by the end of this year. part of that policy, the Columbia River policy in Washington, is that we maintain an economically viable commercial fishery. Right now, we're not really ready to transition off, or we weren't at the time ready to transition off of gill nets. We haven't done enough of our work to get that there, to be ready for that. So I put a lot of energy into updating, getting the right folks around the table. Are we talking about alternative gears? If not gill nets, then what? Also, we're working with the industry on a buyback or a fleet reduction program. If we have fewer fisher, there'll be fewer fishermen, but they can potentially have a better chance at making an actual living at it.
Do you have a new date in mind for when you might be able to phase out gill netting?
I don't have a date in mind. The subcommittees of the two commissions, Oregon and Washington, are supposed to make recommendations this December, and I anticipate that we will have a decision from our commission sometime early next year, in advance of the 2020 season, on whether or not that continues.
I have a sense that for as long as you're in this job, we'll have opportunities to talk about salmon recovery, about wolves and wolf recovery. Thank you for coming in. Kelly Susewind, the Director of the Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
I look forward to coming back and telling you about all the progress we've made.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much. Thank you for watching Inside Olympia, and we'll see you again next week.